The echo of dripping water tapped across the cold concrete floor, blending with the low hum of fluorescent lights above. Rows of steel kennels lined both sides of the narrow hallway, each one holding a soul abandoned by the world. The air smelled of bleach, fur, and a quiet kind of sorrow. Macon Wilder hadn't stepped foot in a place like this in over 3 decades. And yet, here he was walking into a world he never imagined revisiting. At 61, Macon looked older than his years. His flannel shirt was worn thin at the elbows, his boots caked with dirt from the Tennessee farmland he barely tended anymore. He had once been a man full of stories, of rodeo days, roadside diners, and long desert highways. Now, most days were silent. Since Martha passed, the house had turned into a museum of memories. Her laugh still echoed in the hallway, but only in his mind. His son, Thatcher, had urged him to come. "It's just a visit, Dad. Maybe a dog could help. Something alive in that house, for once." Macon didn't believe in second chances, not for men like him. But here he stood, silent and skeptical, letting his boots carry him slowly past barking and begging cages. Then silence. At the very end of the corridor, in the darkest kennel, sat a single puppy. No name on the card, no tail wag, no whimper, just 2 amber eyes, locked on him, unblinking, unreadable. The pup's coat was a striking blend of shadowed browns and caramel, with a splash of white on his chest. Unlike the others, this one didn't plead. He simply watched. A tired-looking shelter worker stepped beside Macon. "That one? Been returned twice. Bit a lady last week. Doesn't trust anyone. We're actually debating putting him down." Macon said nothing. Instead, he crouched slowly, his knees groaning under the weight of age and ache. The pup stood, and then, without sound, lifted one paw and placed it gently in Macon's weathered hand. The contact hit him like a gut punch. It wasn't just a paw. It was a plea. Not for rescue, not for food, but for belief. Macon swallowed hard. "What's his name?" "He doesn't have one," the worker said flatly. "Never stayed long enough with anyone to earn one." Macon stood tall, looked the man dead in the eye. "He does now." And with that, he turned toward the door, pup still holding on to him like a secret too heavy to carry alone. The drive back to the farm was quiet, save for the occasional rattle of Macon's old Chevy and the soft rustle of paws shifting in the passenger seat. The pup hadn't made a sound since leaving the shelter, his amber eyes wide and alert, taking in every mile of highway like it was a foreign land. Macon glanced over a few times, half expecting the dog to panic, whimper, or even lash out. But instead, he sat perfectly still, tense, cautious, but strangely dignified, like someone who knew what it meant to be unwanted and refused to ask for anything more. Back at the house, the dog hesitated at the front steps. The porch creaked under Macon's boots as he stood holding the screen door open. "Come on," he said, trying to sound firm, though his voice came out softer than he intended. The pup looked up at him, then back at the open field behind them, torn between escape and uncertainty. After a long pause, he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, into a home that hadn't felt alive in months. Inside, dust coated the hardwood floors, and silence pressed in like insulation. Macon had cleared out most of Martha's things after the funeral, except for the Afghan still draped over the armchair she loved. The dog sniffed the edge of it, sneezed once, then curled up beneath it like he'd found the safest spot in the world. Macon watched in stunned silence. He hadn't expected this creature to settle in so fast, or at all. And yet, here they were, two broken things under the same roof. Later that evening, Macon sat at the kitchen table with a chipped mug of coffee and a notebook open in front of him. He stared at the blank page for a long time. Naming a dog shouldn't be this hard. But this wasn't just a dog. He needed something that meant something, a name that held weight. Shadow, he finally whispered to the empty room. The pup, as if hearing something he recognized, lifted his head slightly before lowering it back down with a sigh. Macon smiled, just a little. Yeah, Shadow it is. Over the next few days, Macon kept his expectations low. He didn't try to force affection, didn't push for tricks or tail wags. He gave Shadow space. Let him find his rhythm in this new place. And slowly, things began to shift. Shadow followed him out to the barn, sat near the porch during meals, and even dozed beside the fireplace in the evenings. But something lingered beneath the surface. A stiffness, a vigilance, like Shadow never fully let his guard down. And then, one morning, Macon woke to find the back door wide open. The wind howled through the kitchen. Shadow was gone. The cold hit Macon like a slap as he stepped barefoot onto the back porch. The sky was still dark, a heavy blanket of clouds choking out any hint of morning light. He hadn't used the back door in weeks. It stuck slightly on the hinge, and Martha always hated how it let in the draft. Now it stood wide open, the screen door flapping in the wind like a warning too late to be heard. "Shadow," Macon called, his voice low but sharp. The only answer was the creak of an old wind chime and the rustle of dry leaves across the yard. He grabbed his coat from the hook and shoved his feet into muddy boots, not even bothering with socks. The cold didn't matter. Not now. He jogged down the steps, flashlight in one hand, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. He searched the pasture first, scanning the perimeter where the fencing dipped low in spots he hadn't gotten around to fixing. No prints. No fur caught on barbed wire. Just silence. He moved toward the barn, calling again. "Shadow, come on, boy." Still nothing. He paused near the hay bales, the smell of old straw and oil filling his lungs, and suddenly felt a familiar ache, an emptiness that had nothing to do with the dog. It was the same sensation he felt the morning Martha didn't wake up. For a second, Macon wanted to believe maybe Shadow had simply wandered off. Dogs do that. Maybe he got spooked by a raccoon. Maybe he'd be back by sunrise. But deep down, in a place Macon didn't like to acknowledge, he knew better. Shadow hadn't just left. He'd chosen to run. And that hit harder than Macon expected. It felt like a rejection, even though the logical part of him knew better. You can't fix something that's already broken, he thought. You can only hold the pieces for a while. Just as he turned back toward the house, something caught his eye, half buried in the dirt beneath the willow tree. A torn scrap of flannel. His flannel, the one he kept by the porch for working outside. It was soaked and frayed, as if dragged. And next to it, paw prints, smaller than expected, scattered and deep, uneven, like the dog had run, but not without struggle. Macon's stomach turned. This wasn't just a runaway. Something had happened. He looked toward the distant tree-line where the fields blurred into shadow. Fear rose in his throat like bile. Coyotes were common in the area, and a lone pup wouldn't stand a chance if cornered. Without another thought, Macon took off into the dark, boots pounding against the frozen ground. He didn't know what he'd find, but he wasn't going to stop until he did. The woods behind the pasture were dense and quiet. Too quiet. Macon's flashlight cut through the dark like a narrow blade, catching flashes of frost-covered grass and low-hanging branches. The cold was biting now, slicing through his coat and settling into his bones, but he didn't stop. Each crunch of his boots in the frozen earth reminded him he was getting farther from home, and maybe closer to something he didn't want to see. About 30 yards into the tree line, he spotted them, clear, staggered paw prints pressed into the crust of early frost. They curved erratically like Shadow had been weaving, maybe limping. Macon knelt beside them, tracing the shape with his fingers. They were fresh, too fresh. His breath left in clouds as he stood, calling again into the void. "Shadow, boy, I'm here. Come on." Then a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, something softer. A whimper, barely audible, like it was wrapped in the trees themselves. Macon turned sharply, the flashlight jerking with him. "Shadow!" he yelled, more urgency now. He took off in that direction, pushing through brambles and low brush until the beam of light landed on a cluster of fallen logs near a shallow dip in the earth. There, huddled in the leaves and barely visible, was Shadow. His small body trembled, fur slick with mud and matted with blood near one hind leg. His eyes, those same deep, questioning eyes, met Macon's as he approached, wide with pain but also recognition. He didn't bark, didn't run. He stayed still, trusting but weak. Macon crouched, carefully placing a hand on the pup's back. "You're all right, boy. I'm here now." Macon's throat tightened as he examined the injury. A bite mark, deep, ragged. Likely a coyote, maybe two. Shadow had fought back. That much was clear. There were tufts of fur scattered around the clearing. Some his, some not. The thought of what could have happened if he hadn't come tore at Macon in a way he hadn't felt since he stood beside Martha's hospital bed. He gently wrapped Shadow in the flannel scrap he'd found earlier, holding him close like something precious, something fragile. The walk back felt longer. Every step was careful, deliberate, as if Macon were carrying more than a wounded dog. Maybe he was carrying a promise he hadn't realized he'd made, to not let this creature down the way he'd let himself go after Martha died. And as the sun finally began to rise, casting a soft gold across the fields, Macon looked down at Shadow in his arms. For the first time in months, he wasn't walking back to an empty house. He was bringing someone home. The waiting room at Dr. Linda Parker's clinic was warm and smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine cleaner. Macon sat stiffly on the plastic bench, Shadow bundled in his arms like a child clinging to sleep after a nightmare. The pup hadn't made a sound since they'd left the woods. His breathing was shallow, but steady. Macon kept his hand resting gently on the dog's side, as if trying to will his own strength into the wounded animal. Dr. Parker was efficient, direct, and not one for small talk. She examined Shadow with gloved hands, her brow furrowing as she cleaned the bite wound and checked for signs of infection. "He's lucky," she said flatly. "Missed the artery. Could have been a lot worse. Still might be if it's not watched closely." She paused. "This dog's been through something. And not just last night." Macon met her eyes. There was something in his stare that hadn't been there a week ago. A quiet defiance. A protectiveness he hadn't felt since Brian was a boy. "He's staying with me," he said firmly, as if that was the end of the discussion. But it wasn't. Dr. Parker leaned back, pulling off her gloves. "Macon, I'm going to be honest. I know this dog. We've seen him come through here twice before. Fear aggressive. Bit a volunteer. Bit a woman in her 60s. You really want to take that on at your age? He's not just a project. He's a risk." The words hit harder than he expected. He wanted to snap back, to defend Shadow with everything he had. But instead, something else surfaced. Doubt. The kind that crept in during quiet hours, the kind that whispered, "What if you're not enough? Not strong enough, not young enough, not patient enough? What if this dog ended up being more than just a second chance? What if he became another regret?" But then Shadow lifted his head, barely, and nudged Macon's arm with his nose. Just once. It wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was quiet, simple, and in that moment, Macon realized this wasn't just about saving Shadow. It was about saving himself. About proving to the world, or maybe just to the ache inside him, that broken things could still hold value, could still fight, could still love. Macon stood up slowly, holding Shadow close. "He stays," he repeated, softer this time, but with finality. "If you won't treat him, I'll find someone who will." Dr. Parker studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I didn't say I wouldn't treat him. Just be careful." She turned toward the back to prepare antibiotics and bandages. As Macon watched her go, he felt something shift inside him. Not peace, not quite, but resolve. For the first time in a long time, he had a reason to fight again. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. By the end of the second week, Shadow was walking again, slow, cautious steps on the gravel path behind the farmhouse. Macon stayed close, always a few feet behind, giving him space but never letting him out of sight. The wound was healing, but the scars on both of them ran deeper than any visible mark. They walked in silence each morning, a kind of unspoken agreement between two souls not ready to trust the world, but beginning to trust each other. But the town had already started whispering. Martha's old friend, Sutton Marlowe, came by with a jar of preserves and a familiar look of concern. "You sure about this dog, Macon?" she asked, peering down at Shadow, who lay curled near the fireplace. "Word is, he's the same one that bit Mrs. Langley." Nasty wound, stitches and all. Her voice dropped a little. Some folks are saying you're slipping, taking on something dangerous at your age. Macon didn't flinch. He poured her coffee, just like Martha used to, and kept his voice even. People can say what they want. They don't know him. Sutton studied him for a beat, her expression unreadable. Maybe not, but maybe they know you. You've been lost for a long time, Macon. And sometimes when folks are grieving, they hang on to the wrong things. Things that bite back. That night, as the fire crackled low and the wind howled against the windows, Macon stared at Shadow, who lay asleep at his feet. Could Sutton be right? Was he projecting? Filling the silence with something reckless just to avoid facing the emptiness? But then Shadow stirred, his paw twitching slightly, caught in some dream. Without thinking, Macon reached down, his fingers brushing the pup's fur. The dog opened his eyes, groggy but calm, and rested his head against Macon's boot. No one else had seen that side of him. No one else had waited long enough to see it. Later that week, they made a trip into town, just a short walk, but a public one. Shadow wore a makeshift harness, and Macon kept the leash loose but firm. They passed the diner, the hardware store, the familiar benches where old men played cards and gossiped. Eyes followed them, some curious, others suspicious. A little boy tried to pet Shadow, but his mother pulled him back sharply, whispering something that made the boy frown and stare. Macon saw it all, and he felt the weight of every stare. But he kept walking, because this time he wasn't walking alone. Started like any other morning. The sun barely peeked through the low-hanging fog, and Macon was already on the porch, a mug of black coffee in hand. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his front paws, his body calm but alert. The routine had become sacred, quiet moments, no sudden movements, just breathing the same cold air and watching the world wake up. It was peace, but peace Macon knew was fragile. A truck pulled into the gravel drive without warning. Dust kicked up behind the tires as a tall man stepped out. Colt Harrington, Martha's cousin and the town's unofficial loudmouth. He didn't knock, didn't wait. "Macon," he called out, voice sharp. "We got a problem." Shadow's ears perked, but he stayed still, sensing Macon's quiet tension. Colt held up his phone, swiping until he reached a photo. A dead chicken, bloodied and mangled. 3 of them, all torn up. Happened last night over at Maeve Holloway's place. She swears she saw a dark dog near the fence line. Said it limped. Said it looked just like yours. His tone wasn't accusatory, it was worse. It was loaded with expectation, like he was waiting for Macon to admit guilt. Macon stiffened. "Shadow was in the house all night," he said evenly. "Didn't leave my side." But Colt didn't back down. "You sure? He's a rescue. You don't know what he's capable of. All it takes is one bad instinct kicking in. He's an animal, Macon. They go back to what they are when no one's looking." The words hung in the air like smoke. Macon looked down at Shadow, who now sat upright, tail still, eyes locked on Colt. Not aggressive, not afraid, just aware, like he knew he was being judged, again by people who never gave him a chance. Macon's jaw tightened. "You want to blame something, go check the coyote tracks near the woods. But don't come to my porch pointing fingers unless you got proof." Colt gave a dry laugh, stepped back. "Suit yourself. But if it happens again, animal control's getting a call. Maeve's already stirred up half the neighborhood. Folks don't want a biter living down the road, much less one that kills." As the truck pulled away, Macon stood in the silence that followed, heart thudding hard in his chest. He knew Shadow hadn't done it, but doubt, once planted, grows fast. And the town didn't need truth, they just needed something to fear. Macon looked down at Shadow, who hadn't moved. "We don't back down," he whispered. Shadow blinked once and stayed by his side. The letter arrived 2 days later, folded once, slipped into the mailbox like a quiet threat. No return address, just Macon's name in rushed handwriting. Inside, typed and official, was a petition signed by over a dozen neighbors, demanding that Shadow be removed from the property in the interest of public safety. No formal accusation, no hearing. just pressure. Fear, dressed up as civic duty. Macon read it once, then again. His eyes scanned the names. People he'd known for decades. People who had shared holidays with Martha. People who'd once borrowed his tools, laughed on his porch, waved at him from church pews. Sutton's name wasn't on it, but Maeve Holloway's sat bold and underlined. And that, more than anything, made his stomach twist. The town wasn't just doubting Shadow. They were doubting him. Shadow, sensing the shift in energy, approached quietly, resting his chin on Macon's knee. The gesture was small but grounding. Macon's hands trembled as he folded the letter again. He'd spent most of his life teaching people to see past surface judgments, on the rodeo circuit, in the army, even as a father. But now, in the place he'd chosen to grow old, he was being told that second chances had an expiration date. Later that afternoon, Brian called. He'd heard about the incident through someone at the feed store. "Dad, I'm worried. Maybe you should bring the dog here for a while, just until this all settles down." His voice was careful, diplomatic, but underneath it, Macon heard it, doubt. Not just in Shadow, in him. "He's not a threat," Macon said. "He's just misunderstood, like a lot of us." Brian was quiet on the line. "I know you believe that, but the town doesn't, and I don't want to see you hurt if they do something stupid." That night, Macon sat on the porch again. Shadow curled beside him like always, but this time his coffee had gone cold. He stared out across the field, into the darkness beyond the fence line, where so many fears seemed to take root. He remembered the day Martha died, and how empty the world had felt. Shadow had filled that silence, not with noise, but with presence, with loyalty, with something that didn't ask for anything but trust in return. He looked down at the dog who had been left behind so many times, and for the first time, he spoke out loud what had been forming in his heart all along. "They don't get to decide who you are. I won't let them take you, too." And even as the night deepened and the future remained uncertain, Macon knew this fight wasn't just for a dog. It was for every part of himself he thought was lost. The knock came just after sundown, sharp, deliberate. Macon opened the door to find Officer Dale Raymond standing on the porch, hat in hand, eyes apologetic. They had served together in their 20s, and while time had etched lines in both their faces, Macon still recognized the tension in Dale's jaw. He wasn't here as a friend tonight. He was here as law. "I didn't want it to come to this," Dale said quietly, "but we've had 2 more complaints. Chickens again over by the Vance property. People are pushing hard now. Maeve filed a formal request for removal. I have to follow protocol." Shadow stood behind Macon, alert but calm, not barking, not aggressive, just there, watching. Dale glanced at the dog, then back at Macon. "I need to take him in for a behavioral assessment. Just 72 hours, that's all they're asking. You'll get him back if it clears." "No," Macon said, flat and immediate. The word hit the air like a gavel. "He hasn't left this house. I know it and you know it. This isn't about the dog, Dale. This is about fear, about people not wanting to see change, about folks who'd rather label something dangerous than take the time to understand it." Dale sighed, looking down at his boots. "I agree with you, Macon, but that doesn't change what I'm required to do. If you refuse, they'll escalate. We're talking animal control, possibly a court order." Macon stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him with Shadow still inside. The air was cold, but his voice was steady. "Then let them come. Let the whole damn town come if they want. But I'm not handing him over. Not after what we've been through. Not after what he's taught me." His voice cracked slightly. "He's not just a dog. He's the only reason I'm still getting up in the morning." For a long moment, Dale didn't speak. The wind moved through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a train groaned along the tracks. Then Dale put his hat back on and stepped off the porch. "You know what's coming, Macon. Just be ready." As Macon watched the patrol car disappear down the drive, he turned back toward the door. Inside, Shadow sat by the fire, eyes trained on him, waiting, trusting. The world outside might be ready to judge, to take, to destroy, But inside this house, trust still meant something. And Macon Wilder had no intention of letting it be taken away again. The town meeting was held in the church basement, the same place where Macon and Martha had renewed their vows 30 years earlier. But tonight, the mood was different. Folding chairs in tight rows, murmurs bouncing off concrete walls, and a printed agenda that had Shadow Wilder listed as item number 4. Macon sat near the back, Shadow at his feet, leashed but calm. Eyes followed them, some with sympathy, others with judgment. When his name was called, Macon rose slowly. His back ached, but his voice didn't waver. He walked to the front, his boots echoing on the linoleum, and looked out at faces he had known most of his life. People who remembered the man he used to be, but perhaps had forgotten who he still was. Shadow remained behind, sitting at quiet attention. A symbol, a statement. "I know what most of you think," Macon began. "That I'm too old, too stubborn. That this dog is dangerous, unpredictable. That he doesn't belong here." He paused, scanning the crowd. "But here's what you don't know. This dog saved my life. Not by doing something dramatic. Not by pulling me out of a fire or chasing off a burglar. He saved me by being there. When Martha died, I stopped living. I was just waiting out the clock." There was a hush in the room now. Stillness, thick and heavy. "I didn't rescue him. We rescued each other. He's not perfect. Neither am I. But he trusts me. And that trust, it's something I haven't felt in a long, long time." He looked toward Maeve Holloway. "If you've got proof he hurt your animals, bring it forward. If not, then I ask you to stop punishing what you don't understand." A long silence followed. Then Sutton Marlowe stood up. Slowly, carefully. "Macon's right," she said. "We've all been hurt in different ways. We just wear it differently. That dog hasn't given us a reason to be afraid, only a chance to reconsider our assumptions." One by one, others nodded. A few muttered in agreement. Even Dale Raymond, standing at the back, offered the smallest of gestures, a hand to his chest. The motion to remove Shadow was tabled. No vote, no more letters, just a decision, quiet and clear: he stays. Later that night, back at the farmhouse, Macon sat on the porch with Shadow lying beside him, head on his boot. The stars were out, scattered and bright, and the night, for once, felt still in a good way. "They almost made me give up on you," Macon said softly. "But I think I would have given up on myself if I had." Shadow didn't move. He didn't have to. Some bonds don't need words. They just need time and someone willing to believe.